Good morning, I'm Chris Chant, and welcome to Building Apps Faster with Lightning in Winter 17. I'll be your host this morning. Today we're joined by Greg Ruiz and Christoph Conrads, two of our developer evangelists here at Salesforce. They'll be speaking about how you can build apps faster with Lightning Data Service, base components, quick actions, and the utility bar. Now before I begin, just a quick note on our safe harbor slide. When considering future developments, whether by us or with any other solution provider, you should always base your purchasing decisions on what is currently available. We may be covering some items that are not currently available at Salesforce today, and the key takeaway here is we are a publicly traded company, and please make any buying decisions only on the products currently commercially available from Salesforce. All right, getting that out of the way, you can find us on all sorts of social media channels. You can see them here on the slide. You can find us as Salesforce Developers or on Twitter at Salesforce Devs. This webinar is being recorded, and we will post the recap on that YouTube channel you see at the bottom. And finally, if you have any questions, excuse me, please don't wait to ask your questions. Go ahead and type them into the chat window as soon as you have them. Tech support will be moderating and answering the questions starting now. Please don't repeat questions. That support team will be working their way down the queue. Make sure to stick around at the end for a live Q&A. The speakers will be tackling all the questions, time allowing. And finally, if you have any questions that don't get answered today, check out our developer forums. You can find them at developer.salesforce.com/forums, and people are actively moderating those support channels. Great, and with that, we're ready to get started with today's session, Building Apps Faster with Lightning in Winter 17. I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to Greg Ruiz. Thanks, Greg.
All right, thanks, Chris. Welcome, everyone. Again, my name is Greg Ruiz, and I'm happy to be talking to you about building apps faster with Lightning and Winter 17, and one of my favorite features, these base Lightning components. Now, I'm going to cover the base Lightning components, and then a little bit later, Christoph is going to take us through the data services section of the webinar. So let's start by first talking about what are the base Lightning components, and more importantly, why should you care about the base Lightning components that are in Winter 17? Well, it all started actually a while back, in fact, several releases ago, when we were always hearing, as Lightning was rolling out, we were hearing from you, the developers out there, how can I make my app look like the Salesforce Lightning experience? And of course, we know that, being a developer, what did you do? Well, of course, you went through the inspector and tried to reverse engineer the CSS that we had used for the Lightning experience into your own components. And as anyone knows, the C in CSS stands for complicated because it is very hard to reverse engineer CSS. And so that, of course, is where we gave you the Salesforce Lightning design system to begin helping you understand how to build your apps that would look much more like the Salesforce, or exactly like the Salesforce Lightning experience. However, even then, being the typical developers, we still weren't happy because then you said, can you make it easier? I want to be doing this easier, because the problem that you were telling us you were having is, okay, I've got to go to the Lightning design system, I've got to figure out how to take this HTML over, put it into my own components, and then figure out how to make modifications to it. And then, more importantly, after that, even still, I've got to do other things like actually wire it up so that it works. That, in a nutshell, is where the journey towards base Lightning components actually began, and why we're so excited to have these in Winter 17. Now, before we begin looking at the components, let's understand some of the goals that we had as a team as we set out to build these base Lightning components. The first is, as I said, we wanted to make it easy for you to adopt. And the way we thought about doing that and making it easy is, hey, we're working in HTML anyway, so why don't we pattern these base components after HTML standards? That way, as a developer, I'm not having to learn anything new. I'm not having to remember how to do something, because it's not a different paradigm than the one I'm already working in. It is simply HTML-like. We also wanted to make sure that they were componentized, that these are self-contained, and that these individual components could then be mixed together to build larger components, or things that we call internally experience components. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we wanted to make sure there was minimal CSS involved. In other words, from the outset, we decided to build these components based on the Salesforce Lightning design system. That way, again, you are ensured that those components are going to match the actual Lightning experience. And in addition, as the Salesforce Lightning design system evolves, that means because they're based on SLDS, you automatically get all the newness and goodness should SLDS change the look or feel of a particular component. Now, that's not to say that you won't be using some CSS, and I'm going to show you how to work with some CSS a little bit later. But then the last thing, of course, we couldn't forget this, and that is accessibility. Always, always, always. Accessibility is baked in by design. So these components are 100% accessible as well. So let's talk about the philosophy that we had, and that is the philosophy of actually doing a component, building a component so that we can facilitate the reusability over and over throughout each one of the components. Things are going to be familiar with you or to you because, again, we are going to be reusing things through over and over through each component. And we are going to be somewhat, I'm just going to put it out there, we're going to be somewhat restrictive in the shape, if you will, of, in other words, the design of these components. We're not going to open everything up to you to start. Now, that doesn't mean we're not listening, of course, because we do want to make sure that those components can be used the way that you need them to be used. So if you do find something, you say, hey, geez, it would be so nice if I could only do X, Y, or Z with this particular component, then please let us know, because that is where we are gathering feedback from you, and we can begin implementing or actually relaxing some of the constraints that we're putting on these components. And again, best practices over and over and over and over and over again. One of my colleagues likes to say, we want to make it hard or easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing. And that's one of the core tenets here. Now, before we get all too excited, I do want to put one caveat in there, and that is we're not looking to build components that are going to do literally any and everything that you might come up with. We're looking at trying to build for that 80% use case. And for that 20%, we're still going to have to be developers and actually go out and do some coding on our own. But these components are intended to cover that 80% use case. Now, how did we come up with what components that we wanted to build? Well, we actually talked to you. We talked to our own internal developers. We did an audit and looked at all of the things, all the types of components that are being used throughout the Salesforce ecosystem. And there are tons and tons and tons of components that we found. And then once we found that, then we could say, okay, let's go and look at what would be realistic for us to build as these reusable base components. And of course, we wanted to bake all of the styling right in. So no matter what it is, whether we're talking about buttons or icons or badges or inputs, all the styling of that component is actually baked right in by simply declaring a very simple markup. That simple markup starts with, as you can see on screen, the Lightning namespace. So that's going to be new for us today. Lightning : is the namespace for all of these brand new base components. Now, which ones do we include in Winter 17? Well, we've included icon, button, button group, button. Now you can read the list here. It's quite an extensive list of those core building blocks that we found through that audit as we looked at all the components being built. Now, again, as I said, remember, we're not trying to make them do everything and build all of them all at once. We're trying to give you the building blocks so that you can combine these together to build the components that you need much, much faster. And we're going to do that through some reusable patterns. So, for example, here I have a Lightning button group on screen. And you notice in the code there to the right, it's got 3 buttons and then another button menu, and inside of that some menu items. So again, very familiar patterns that you and I as developers are familiar with and can very quickly adopt. Now, it's not just about, there are some other components that we built that aren't really a component unto themselves, but are more of a layout component or container. Things like tab sets and tabs or cards. Or there's a new thing called layout and layout item. I'm really excited about it because the layout and layout item components are actually built using the Flexbox model that is in SLDS, that SLDS uses to lay out things. And you can lay out not only an individual component, but an entire page, if you will, using these new layout Lightning components. So again, very familiar concepts for us. And of course, the structure of each component mimics the structure of all the other components. So once we learn one style of coding, then we're off and running when we use all of these others. Now, of course, there are changes. You may want to have something look a little bit different from the other button that you've got. And of course, we baked that in there as well through something we call variants. So for example, with the Lightning button, I'm going to use one a little bit later, we have a variant called brand, which gives us that blue color, or the red being the variant that is destructive, as you can see in the code there. And again, remember that each one of these components also contains just standard things that you would expect. I said there was accessibility baked in, so you'll notice that Lightning button, the second one, has a label of delete. So for accessibility, they're going to hear that. On click, of course, being our click handler, so we're going to be able to go in and wire up our buttons functionality. And then at the end, class, of course, because we know that even as good a job as we have done, you might need some tweaks that can be applied through CSS. Now, as I mentioned, everything is based on the Salesforce Lightning design system. So that means that we are taking full advantage of that CSS framework to provide that consistent user experience and, again, get those upgrades each and every time that the SLDS team pushes a new version of the Lightning design system. And what does that mean for us as components? It means that we are evolving as well. Now, as I said, we started with these few building blocks, but it is our goal to watch what is happening with the Salesforce Lightning design system and take those components and in turn turn them into base Lightning components. Now, we're always going to be, and let's be upfront and honest, we're always going to be a little bit behind them because they have to build it first, and then we can take it and convert it into Lightning or base Lightning components. But that is our goal, is to continue to follow along in march step, if you will, with the Salesforce Lightning design system. Now, I know we've not even looked at Winter 17, but I do want to give you a peek behind the curtain, as it were, as to what we have upcoming. And this is what we're planning. So for Spring 17, we're going to continue building out those components and adding some things that we know that you want, but that we just couldn't get into the Winter 17 list. Things like tiles and pills or modals. Those are the kinds of things that we'll be looking at next. And then in Summer 17, continuing down that road, or 17, excuse me, continuing down that road, even to the point of introducing and beginning to introduce or build some of those experience style or data bound components as well. So that's what we have planned for you, but that's all pie in the sky right now because we're talking about Winter 17. Let's go actually have a look at what it means to build using the new base Lightning components. So I'm going to switch over here to my browser right now. And over here in my page, I've actually put a placeholder for a quick prospect component placeholder. Because basically what I want to be able to do, we're using our Dreamhouse application, and this is for a fictional real estate company, and as a broker, I may be talking with someone about a particular property, and I want to grab their details real quick, their first name, last name, their phone number, or whatever. And I don't want to have to leave the page that I'm looking at. So I thought I'll build a component right here. So let's start by just going over and opening up our developer console. And here you can see in the developer console, I have my quick prospect component placeholder. Now, I'm just going to remove that text there for a moment. And we're going to start off with a base Lightning component. Now, as I said, this is just going to be a little quick form. So I'm going to start with Lightning. And now I'm live coding, so let's hope that I don't make any mistakes here. Input, and I'm just going to start by giving that a name, and we'll just call that first name. And then we're going to give it a label because, again, as we said, we want to make sure that we're also accessible, and that also is going to appear for us, even as someone who's not even worried about accessibility here with that input. And that's it. I can go ahead and save this. We'll head back over into our browser real quick. We'll do a quick refresh and see that once we have refreshed, that is if I saved, we'll get another refresh here. And I must not have saved. Oh, there we go. Check for JavaScript errors. It says I was over here. See what we actually said. And that is, like I said, I'm live coding here, so I'm hoping that I'm able to do this. Let's just save that again. There we go. Now it's nicely done. All right. We'll switch back over. We'll refresh one more time. There we go. And now, woohoo, I have a field. I have an input field. I know that's really impressive for you, but now let's make it a little bit more impressive. Let's add a couple more fields because, you know, as we begin using these base components, I'll go ahead and copy here, and we will paste another one in. And this one we'll just say this is going to be our last name. Now, you know, when we're building things like this, you know, a form, you want to make sure that the things that are required actually are required. And that up to now has meant that, oh, I've got to go do my own validation, but no longer, because you'll see I can simply say required equals true. And now I'll go ahead and save that. And you'll notice when we look at our new component here, you'll notice over here on the in the last name field, you'll notice that little familiar red asterisk indicating this is now a required field. Well, what does that actually mean for us? Well, again, let's continue on down that road. I'll take and just copy this again and paste it in. And this time, let's do an email. Now, we'll say this is going to be our email. We'll say the label is going to be email. And this, though, while it's required, that's great. But how do I know if you actually enter a valid email? Well, I'm just going to change this and say this is of type equals email. So these base input components actually support all of the standard HTML5 types of input. So email, number, phone number, all of those kind of things. So I'll go ahead and say, let's save that and see if that is now what effect that has had over here on our component. As we look back over here, notice I do have my little red email, but now watch, as I begin to type, I suddenly am seeing, oh, you've entered an invalid format. And that's going to remain there. Oh, wait, as I delete it, it says, no, this is required. You have to complete this field. So I'll just go ahead and say, I'm Greg at let's see, greg.com there. Oops, com there. And there we go, and that's a valid email. You'll notice that that warning has gone away. So validation built in, and not just simple validation. Let's go one harder. Let's go and say, I'm going to take this thing, I'll copy this. We're going to turn this one into a phone number. So we're going to say phone, and our label is going to be phone. And now the type is also going to be of type tel, which is our telephone. And now I want it required, but I need to make sure that they're going to type in a phone number that I'm familiar with. So I'm going to say, first of all, let's just put in a placeholder. So again, just those standard patterns. And since I'm in the US, I will use a standard US number pattern for my placeholder to indicate what I'm expecting. But then I'm even going to give a pattern. And I'm going to say, let's give us a pattern. And that pattern is going to say 0 to 9 is fine, and I need 3 of those. And then I'm going to expect, and I'm going to put this down on the next line so it's easier for us to see here. So then I'm going to say, okay, not after that 3, we'll have a dash, then another 0 to 9, and we'll take 3 of those, and another dash, and then we'll take 0 to 9 again, but this time we want 4 of those. Just a standard, oops, if I get it right here, a standard regex statement here. So there's my pattern, which means, of course, as we once again run over, do a quick refresh, we'll see now our phone number has its placeholder, and if I begin to type, our entry doesn't match the allowed pattern, that is, until I complete the pattern. And now we see that that validation has occurred as well. Okay, great. I've got my form going. Now the last thing I want to do is to go ahead and put in a button that I could then wire up to make this actually happen. Now, I've been typing up to now, but I'm sure you want to know, how did I learn all of these things, and where can you go to learn about these brand new base components? Well, it's really, really simple. I'm going to run back over to my browser for a moment, and I'm just going to go to our Lightning Components Developer Guide. So going to developer.salesforce.com/docs, you can get to that Lightning Component Developer Guide, and I've scrolled down here into the reference section. And in the reference section, you'll notice that we have component reference that I've opened, and inside that component reference, here we have all of those nice Lightning components that we just talked about. We have those inputs that I was just showing you, as well as here I have Lightning button. So if I want to use a particular component, first of all, you'll notice we give you a nice explanation of how to use that, as well as all the attributes available. And we also have a little bit of code samples here so that we can just simply go, all right, I want to take this Lightning button. I'm going to copy that, run back over here, and then I'm going to paste that in. There we go. Let's get that nice and formatted. And you'll notice I'm going to go ahead and save this, which means back over here, if we switch back over to our page, we're going to see that we now have a button here as well on our brand new Lightning component. And is that typical blue button because I have used that variant of brand. If I take off that variant, then we're going to go back to our default. So I'll just save that. And you can see that now as I refresh one last time, we're going to see our standard hollow, if you will, submit button there, not that blue brand button. So now all I need to do is go ahead and wire that up, write my controller logic to wire this form up and save this information into the database. But there's one more little surprise that I have for you. That is, maybe I'm sitting here working and I'm thinking, you know, I don't necessarily want to take up the screen real estate that I have for this form all the time on my page. I actually would like it, you know, to be able to just appear when I need it. Well, we all know how you do that. That's a quick action. But I don't have a quick action, or do I? Yes, I do, because in Winter 17, you see I've actually added in a little bit of code here for our component here, and that is this little bit of code right here. It says force lightning quick action. That force : lightning quick action now means that I can actually register this as a quick action and put it onto my pages. So how do I do that? Well, in order to do that, let's run back over here. Let's go to our setup home. And I'm going to type in actions here, which I've already done for speed's sake. I'm going to go to my global actions. And I'm going to say, let's create a brand new action. In that new action, I'm going to say, what do I want to do? Well, I want to actually have a Lightning component action type. Now, which one do I want? There's our quick prospect, the one that we asked for. Maybe I want to make this a little bit bigger here because I got a rather large form there. And then I'm finally going to say, what do I want to call this? Let's call this quick prospect. Oops, actually quick prospect, there we go. And let's actually call it quick prospect here as well. Actually, I'm going to make a space there in my label and save that. Now, once that has been saved, it means that I now can go to my property layout. So if I go back over here and I choose my, oops, I've just got to get a window out of the way here. I choose my edit page, and I say, all right, up here in that quick actions bar, once we have loaded here, we're going to see, I'm going to click on that quick actions bar, and I'm going to see that I'm only displaying, first of all, 2 of those visible actions. So I'm going to want my edit button to disappear and be replaced by my quick prospect button. How do I do that? I just go over here to my property layout. I'm going to say, in my property layout, what am I looking for? Well, I'm going to look into my Salesforce 1 and Lightning actions, and we're going to see there is my quick prospect. So I'm just going to drag that down in here, so that it's going to appear here inside of my quick actions. We'll do a quick save, head back over onto our page where we can, of course, go back out. And if all has gone well, we're going to see that we now have our quick prospect button up here in the quick actions bar. And if I click on that, I now have my quick action, my Lightning component available as a quick action exactly as I coded it on the page. So I could probably go ahead and just remove this one from the page. So, wow, that was a heck of a lot crammed into a very short amount of time, but there's even more. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Christoph and have him take us through the rest of the webinar.
Thank you, Greg. That was great. So yes, so what I will do in like 20 minutes, I will take you through the new Lightning data service. And then at the end, as we mentioned before, we will have a Q&A. So before I start, let's take a quick look at how you build applications today, and Greg gave you a great example of that. It's all about components. If you look at the page that Greg was actually working on, there are a number of components there, and in fact, it starts with the default layout, which internally we built as a Lightning component, right in the middle there. And then, of course, we have all the custom components that we add, like, for instance, at the top, we have a property status bar indicating if the property is available under agreement and that kind of thing. And then we have a property map showing the property on a map, mortgage calculator, picture gallery, all sorts of components. And in fact, let me show you that page live, and you just saw it before. So again, property status here, map, mortgage calculator. Now, if you think about it, all these components need data. And we want them to be really encapsulated and, if you want, self-sufficient, but they all need data. So the property status needs the status of the property, obviously. The map needs the address and location of the property. And the mortgage calculator needs to know the price of the property, so I can pre-fill that form here and make it easy for you to calculate the mortgage. So until now, I wanted to quickly review the way you have been doing that, the way you have coded these components to actually get the data and get essentially the same data. All these components need the data about that specific property. So let's take a quick look at the code and see how we have done that until recently. So I'm looking at the property map component here. And the first thing you will notice is that there is a controller there. And that controller is essentially an Apex class that will have a method that will provide the data for a specific property. And then you have a few attributes, like, for instance, record ID, which will be passed the specific ID of the property we are looking at. And then we have another attribute, which is property, which will hold the data for that property. So that's kind of the setup, but at this point there is still nothing inside that property attribute. So the way we do it, we set up a handler in that component which says that when the component initializes, we will execute that doInit function in the client-side controller. So let's take a peek there and see what we do. So this is the doInit function. So the first thing that I do here is get a reference to the remote method that's actually provided by the Apex controller. So this is a method in the Apex controller. So maybe at this point I can actually show you that Apex controller. So here it is, property controller. So that's what we indicated in the client-side component. And as you can see, it has a method called getProperty that takes an ID. Obviously, we want to retrieve a specific property. And you see that here towards the bottom, eventually what we will do is execute a SOCL statement and return the data for a property matching that specific ID that was provided. So we'll do that at the end, but as good developers, before we can do that, we need to enforce CRUD and field level security, making sure that we don't return fields that the specific user that's logged in is not allowed to view. So you developers should actually do that, and if you don't, your component will probably not pass a security review. So here is a quick way, I do it here. So I list all the fields that I will return, and then I loop through these fields, and I make sure that for each field, the user is actually allowed to see that field. So that's essentially what a typical controller looks like. So back to my client-side controller. So I have a reference to that method now. So the first thing that I will do is pass the record ID of the property that I want to see, and then I will execute the method, the remote method. And when we come back, this is obviously an asynchronous call. I'm checking the state of that request. If it's successful, then I will make my property attribute point to the return value of that method. In other words, the data about that specific property. So that's essentially how it works today. And let's take a look. So that was the map. So that was only one of the components. So if I looked, for instance, at the mortgage calculator component, let's see how that was done there. And you will see that it's super similar. So first I declare a controller, so that's that Apex class. Again, I have a record ID property that's going to hold data for that property. And then I have my initializer, my init handler if you want, and I do the exact same thing here, reference to that remote method. I pass the record ID, and if all goes well, I make that property attribute point to the property that was returned by my Apex class. So that's how it's done today. So let's take a step back and kind of review on a slide how it really works. So you have all these components. So we looked at the map and calculator, but there are other components there, including the basic layout, and they all call essentially the same method in the same controller, the same Apex controller there. And as a result of that, so they make that server-side call, and then as a result of making their own call to the server, they all end up with their own copy of the record. So property status has its own copy, its own object representing the property, and so does the map and the calculator. So that's probably how you've been doing it today. And there are some challenges with this approach. And I want to just cover 3 here that are really important. So if each component makes its own call to the server, you obviously end up with multiple calls to the server for essentially the exact same record. So that's probably not super efficient because you have all these redundant calls to the server if you want. So that's one problem. The second problem, I hope I was able to convince you that there was a lot of code in there, including JavaScript code that was not trivial at the client side, and then at the server side, Apex code that, if you want to do it right, includes FLS and field level security enforcement and all that stuff. So that's a lot of work. And then the last challenge that I wanted to emphasize here is that because each component has its own version of the data, it's really easy for you to create UIs that are in an inconsistent state, right? Because the changes that you make, so if you have one component and you make changes to the data in that component, these changes are not automatically reflected in the other components, and then you have different values for the same field in different components, and so it's very confusing from the user point of view. So these are essentially the challenges that we try to address with the Lightning Data Service. So to quickly look at what it is, what is that Lightning Data Service? It's essentially a declarative approach to let you do CRUD operations in your Lightning components. So create, update, delete operations in your Lightning components, but in a declarative way. So in other words, there is no Apex involved, no sockle that you have to code, and very limited JavaScript, and we'll speak about that in a second. Also, the Lightning Data Service handles the security, like field level security automatically. We'll cover that as well. And because the Lightning Data Service works with a shared record cache at the client side, all the components actually share a single version, a single copy of the data, and that means that you can't have these inconsistent states between components because they actually all point to the exact same data. So let's quickly look at a slide here to see how that really works. The first thing you'll see, okay, we have the same components there. There is no longer an Apex controller. In fact, if you look at the right side of that slide, that represents my, the server side of my architecture here. There is nothing in there, no Apex class, no Apex controller at all. Instead, each of these components will use that new tag that represents the Lightning Data Service force record. And what you're basically saying there is, I want to work with one record. Which record? Well, the one you specify as the record ID. So that's the Salesforce ID for that specific record. And as you can see here, because these are all components on the same page, they all work on the same record, and they will actually get the data not from the server anymore, but from that local cache. Okay, so if I'm the first component that needs that specific record, so the local cache will probably fetch it from the server. Okay, but all the other components will then be able to fetch the record directly from that cache. But that's completely transparent to you as a developer. All you have to do is to use that specific tag. So let me show you how it works. And the first thing that I wanted to do is to show you, remember I showed you how easy it was to create inconsistent UI. So I just wanted to give you an example and then see if we can fix it. Like for instance here, let's say that I change the address of a property. It's not 505 Park Drive anymore, but let's say that it's 503. Okay, and notice here in the map component that obviously I have that address as well, indicating the location of that property. So now I'm going to save this. And so you see that I have 503 here, which is obviously my new value, but the map didn't pick up that change. Why? Because it has its own copy of that property, and because it's a different copy, it was not updated. And similarly, if I change the price, notice here in the mortgage calculator, I have, the price. Right now it's consistent, but let's say that, I'm not selling that property, so I'm gonna reduce the price. Here we go. I save it, and again, now you really have a UI that's in a completely inconsistent state at least two different places. All right. So what we're gonna try to do here is to fix that. So I'm gonna quickly go in App Builder and actually replace this, the implementation of these two components, the map and the mortgage calculator, with an implementation, exactly the same component, but actually using a data service instead, and I'll show you that code in just a second. So that's the map, and so this is the data service version of my mortgage calculator. So I'm gonna save this and hit back here. And so before I show you the code, let's see if we can still create an inconsistent UI. So I'm gonna again change the price here, maybe go back to 505 and save. Okay, and you see that automatically that change was picked up. And again, I'm gonna change the price here back to, I don't remember what it was, maybe 420. Let's do that. And you see that the change was automatically picked up. This is completely code-free, and it's simply due to the fact that these components actually point to the same record. So let's take a peek at the code, and I will start here with property map. Okay, so the first thing you notice is that there is no controller involved, right? Remember, we used to have an Apex controller here. It's gone. We still have record ID and property attributes because we obviously still need to hold these values, the property data. And now we have this new tag, so force record, that in fact in Winter 17 you use record preview, and that is simply because this feature is in developer preview in Winter 16. Later, when it becomes GA, it's going to be a force record by itself, but now we want to make sure you know that it's a preview feature. Okay, so as I mentioned before, you're indicating that you want to work with a record. Which record? We bind to the record ID attribute. And then that record is going to be fetched from the cache. And we need to tell the Lightning Data Service here where to store a reference to that record. And that's exactly what that target record is. So we say, hey, when you fetch the data, store that in this property attribute here. And then you can specify the fields that you want to work with. So for instance, for the map, we need the address, and then we need the latitude and longitude for that property. Now notice that if I look at the client-side controller here, there is absolutely zero code related to retrieving the data. Okay, so really this tag is all you need to retrieve the data. Okay. And so let's look at mortgage calculator here, and you'll see that it's exactly the same thing. So there is no Apex controller. We still have record ID and property, and then in the same way we did it for the map, we have force record. We specify which record, where to store it. And here it's interesting, instead of listing all the fields that we want, which can be, a lot of them, you can also point to a layout and say, so in this case, we say, hey, fetch all the fields of the default layout for that record. So in that way, you don't have to kind of list them all. So that's essentially how things work. And let's kind of review here on the slide what you need. And this is really a full working component, fully functioning component that is able to retrieve data simply with these two attributes, and then the force record tag, and then we can bind to property. And it's as simple as that, essentially 4 or 5 lines of code. Now, all the examples that we looked at so far are essentially read-only, right? So we retrieve data to, display the property on a map or to display the value of the property. But of course, Lightning Data Service can also work to modify data, and that can be to simply update the value of a field, or it can be to delete a record altogether. And so to work in that mode, all you have to do is to add the mode attribute to the force record tag and set mode to edit, indicating that you intend to modify the record, right? And then the other thing that you'll have to do is to provide an ID to that record object so that we can reference the record in code, and I'll show you how you would do that in a second. Okay, so for instance, let's say that in this example we want to modify the status. So this is like a bare bone version of the property status bar that we have on top of the page there. Right, so we would have an input text field here where we store the status of a property. Is it available? Is it under agreement? But because it's an input text, the user can obviously modify that. And then we would have a button here that would say, okay, save. If you want to save that, what is the code that is involved? A one-liner, that one line of code. And that is why you needed an ID for the force record tag, because we need to be able to find it in code. and then all we have to do is invoke its save record method, and at that point, without any Apex or any code at all at the server side, the record will be persisted. So instead of showing you too many slides here, let's take a quick peek at that, in real life here. So what I'm really doing is trying to reproduce this cool little component here, the status bar, but I have a bare bone version, and it's bare bones so that we can really focus on the code. So let me add it to the page here very quickly. So it is called property status. So let's find it here, and I'm going to add it at the top there. So you see that it's super bare bone. It's indeed just that input field and a save button. Let's save that page and go back and see if it works. So you see that indeed it was able to fetch the status here and display the status. So that's great, and it's consistent with the status here and the status that's also displayed in the main layout here. So now let's see if I can indeed modify that value. So instead of under agreement, I will simply say available. Okay, and so let's see what happened to the other components. So I'm going to click save here, and you see that indeed automatically, without any other form of code, the status bar here picked up the change, and the main layout too picked up the new value for the status field. So that's great. Now let's quickly see if it works the other way around. So what if I change the status in this component, see if my bare bone component is going to pick it up. So I'm going to go to under agreement here, and even though the main layout picked up that change, my component didn't pick it up. And that's kind of strange because we've seen this working before, right? And I can show it to you again. Remember, for my map here, if I change the address, for instance, you see that essentially with the same kind of code, it picked up the change. So why didn't it work here? And the difference, if you remember, between these components is that the map is read-only, and this component, my status component, is in edit mode. So if you're in read-only, we figure, okay, well, if the value of a field changes, we want to let you know automatically because there is really no risk involved. But if you are in edit mode, you may actually be in the middle of changing the value in your own components here. So if someone changes the value in another component and we just blindly overwrite what you're doing, maybe that's not kind of the best option. So if your component is in edit mode and you're able to modify that value instead of overriding blindly, we give you the option to decide what you want to do with that new value. So let me actually show you how this would work. So I'm going to bring up that property status component here. Okay, and it's looking exactly like I showed you on the slide. So I put my component in edit mode, but now the force record tag has an event that you can wire to kind of take action when the record is updated outside your own component, maybe by another component. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to wire that event. So I'm going to say, okay, if the record is updated outside the component, then I'm going to call the on record updated in my client-side controller, okay? And in fact, I'm going to save this. So we are calling this function in the client-side controller. In the interest of time, I already coded that handler here. So you see that it's just an event that gets fired when the value is modified outside your own component. You get an event object that you can then look at to see what type of change you're dealing with, because it can be changed, which means that values were modified, but it could also be deleted or other things. So you maybe what you do depends on the type of change that you're dealing with. So in this case, I'm simply handling changes, and I'm like, okay, I'm totally fine reloading, the new value. If I was editing, okay, too bad. So obviously here you can decide what you want to do when values are updated outside, but in this case, I'm simply reloading the new value. So let's, with that change, let's see, I'm simply gonna reload the page here, and we'll see if that will work. So, okay, so now I'm in a consistent state, under agreement, under agreement, under agreement, and I'm gonna go back here to available, and you see that now indeed this component, reloaded, picked up the new value. So that is essentially how you can create, components that modify data without code, and also that react to data being modified outside, your own component. Now, there was one thing that I wanted to quickly mention. Remember that code that I had to write in Apex to enforce field level security? I told you that you didn't have to do any of that when you work with the Lightning data service. So let's make sure that that's true. So here I have my status field. So I'm in the property object. I'm in the object manager. I looked at all my fields. I selected the status field, and you can change the type and do that kind of stuff. But what I'm going to do here, I'm going to apply some field level security to the status field. And just for the sake of the example, even though it wouldn't make a lot of sense in real life, I will say that sysadmins actually cannot see the status of a property. So I will remove that right. You can't, as an admin, you can't see the status of a property anymore, and I'm going to save that, okay? And so without doing anything else, I'm going to come back here and simply refresh this page. And you will see now that obviously the status disappeared from the main layout. The status bar is unable to display the status because it doesn't have access to the field. And same thing for my barebone version, of the property status. It cannot show the value of the status, and that was done automatically. No code required here. So let's quickly go back to the slides to summarize what we did. We quickly discussed here how to sync records when you are in edit mode. Remember, in that case, it doesn't happen automatically like it does in read-only mode. You have to kind of code an event for that, but it's actually fairly easy to do. And for reference here, I provide you with the code that we used in the slide. And that's really all the time we have to cover the Lightning data service. So I wanted to quickly summarize what we discussed. So remember that the Lightning data service is simply a declarative approach to perform CRUD, create, update, delete operations in your Lightning components. Compared to how you did it before, it has a number of benefits, and if you only remember 3 things from this data service as part of the presentation, I would like you to remember those. In the traditional approach, you had a lot of code to write, not only JavaScript at the client side, but Apex, and if you wanted to do it right, there was a lot. There was a lot there: Apex, SOCL, field level security, and that kind of stuff. The second benefit of the Lightning data service is that, unlike the traditional approach where you make multiple calls to the same for the same data, to the server for the same data, in this case your components speak to a local cache, a client-side cache, and that client-side cache will manage communication with the server automatically and efficiently. In other words, you won't have these multiple calls to the server, and that will potentially dramatically improve page loading, because remember, if you have a number of components on the page and they all make redundant calls to the server for the same data, that would impact the page load time. And finally, as we witnessed ourselves, with the traditional approach, it's really easy to create inconsistent UIs. Of course, you can handle all that with, application events to notify, other components that something has changed. But when you use the Lightning data service, because you share a single copy of the record, automatically you get your UI in a very consistent state without code. And so that's all we have for today. So before we get to Q&A, I wanted to point out the Dreamhouse application. So all the examples that we looked at today are taken from our Dreamhouse sample application. If you haven't seen it before, we have a microsite for it at dreamhouseapp.io. If you click that installation link there, you can have it installed, I think, in less than 5 minutes, shouldn't take more. So try it. You'll have all these examples, a bunch of Lightning components using base Lightning components and data service in there. So that's a kind of a call to action. Finally, your feedback is really important to us to make sure that we deliver content that's valuable and that's helpful. So there is a link there where we have a short survey. If you can take a minute to fill it in, that would be super helpful. At the end, don't worry if you don't catch that link right now. You'll get an email with the recording, a link to the recording of this presentation, and again, the link to that survey. And so with that, I think it's time now to move to Q&A. So I will hand it over back to Chris to tell us how this will work.
Hey, thanks a lot, Christoph, and thanks everyone who's joined the webinar. We have a ton of questions, so just a heads up, we will be posting the questions with their answers in the webinar after we've posted the recording. So if you don't hear your question answered today, check back in a few days after we've got that posted, and we'll have those questions answered for you. And because of the volume of questions, I'm just going to go ahead and run through and answer a handful of these, and then start fielding them to Greg and Christoph. So let's go and get started. Question 1, aren't some of the base components available in Winter 17 beta? Yes, they are. Are you able to affect left-hand and right-hand side placement of the required red asterisk in Lightning components? Yes, that's through the Lightning Design System helper classes. Question 3, if the base components are building blocks, can they be extended or customized? Initially, the intent is not to allow these components to be extended, but customization can be done through CSS. Next question, is there a Trailhead lesson or sample available on Lightning components? Yes, there are lots of Trailhead modules available for Lightning components, and we'll be building new ones for the base Lightning components as well. Next question, will there be a page that shows all the components? There is a page in the documentation. If you search for the Lightning Components Developer Guide on developer.salesforce.com/docs, you'll see a list of all the available components, and keep an eye on that page. It'll get updated with each release. Next question, data service, is this a generally available feature? The documentation says it's dev preview. It is still a dev preview. A question for you, Greg. Are you saying the base input components don't yet support data binding the same way that UI input components do? Do you have an answer to that one, Greg?
Sure. I mean, it's sort of a yes/no answer. No, not exactly the same way that that the old UI components do so, but hopefully you sort of saw through Christoph's part of the demo that absolutely there is data binding available from within the component.
Thank you, Greg. I'm going to do one more for you, Greg, and then we'll jump over to Christoph's section. Next question, can you build a Lightning application without the Lightning experience being enabled, or would that require wrapping the app in Visualforce?
So I'm assuming that you're talking about building it in a Visualforce side of things? Yes, then it would have to be wrapped in Visualforce.
Great, thank you. couple quick ones really quick before we hop over to Christoph's. Can you customize validation messages? Yes, you can. For simple form element validation, may the default messages be changed? If so, can you also control when they begin to show? For example, start on the third letter of someone typing an email address before showing validation. Yes and no, you can change the message. You can change the message, but we don't have a control over the validation timing. I believe that is on the roadmap for a future release.
Yes.
Is there any plan to support HTML pass-through attributes or arbitrary data attributes on base Lightning components? I believe the answer is yes. All base components can use data attributes. And we'll go ahead and just hop over to Christoph's section. Question 1, for the Lightning quick action, we are required to hard code a height. How does it behave for browser size change or in a tablet, etc.?
That's actually on mine.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. You want to go ahead and answer that one, Greg?
Sure. I mean, that is currently a limitation that we are hard coding that, but we are aware of that. So, these are all incremental steps, and so as we add this new functionality, we obviously see, oh wow, because we added this, now we need to look at something else. So we know that, we're aware of it, we'll be working on it.
Great, thanks, Greg. Next question, and just a heads up to our attendees. I know we're a few minutes over. We'll probably go about 7 more minutes, so we'll wrap up at 10 after the hour. Next question, is there a way to create a quick action button within a component without having to set it through the page layout? This would allow quick actions to be utilized outside of the header, outside of just the header. And I believe that's not currently available. Here's a question for Christoph. Is there any way to access the selected list items in a page layout right from the standard layouts in Lightning with the latest Winter 17 update?
Sorry, Chris, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, sorry about that. The question is there any way to access the selected list items in a page layout right from the standard layouts in Lightning latest Winter 17 update?
I'm not sure. We'll have to get back to you for that question.
Great. We'll go ahead and move on to the next one.
Yep.
Next question is, in Property Controller, why do we have the class as global? Does it serve any extra purpose? And that's for you, Christoph.
Yeah, I mean that's convention for classes that you access remotely. They just need to be global.
Great, thank you. Next question, does the data service support parent-child relationships?
Yeah, so right now, I didn't really have time to, speak about the roadmap for data service. And remember, all this is safe harbor because, the feature itself is still in preview. So there are some limitations related to that. So right now, you can really only, access the main record directly through the data service tag. Also, it works on single records and not on collection of records. So this is also something that we're kind of looking at, for future releases to support collections of records instead of, just single records.
Great. Next question is, when should one use force : input versus lightning : input? Yeah,
I don't think that's specifically related to data services, but in general, so the direction is that we are moving towards the base Lightning components. So use those if they work for if the component is available and finalized, because that's definitely the direction that we are going towards. If the component is not yet available and there is a UI namespace component that works for you, you can still use that in the meantime, but direction is certainly to go towards a Lightning namespace.
Cool. There's a question, is there a guess on the timeline for the force : record being generally available? This is going to be more of a forward-looking statement. I believe we're targeting spring, but again, this is very much a safe harbor answer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's essentially the answer, but it's totally safe harbor at this point.
Great. Next question, how do you save data back through the record preview service?
Yeah, so that's another thing that we don't have in the in the preview right now. So the local cache is going to pick up all the changes made at the client side. But what we don't have is say that a value is modified throughout a different channel. So essentially, the value is modified at the server side. There is no way at this point to notify the cache that the value was changed at the server side. So that's also something that we are looking at.
Great. Two related questions. Are all these new features available for community Lightning components? Follow-up question, does Lightning Data Service work with communities?
Greg, I don't know if you know the answer to that. I'm not totally sure, so I don't want to create excitement or the opposite of excitement, but we will need to, unless Greg, you know off the top of your head, but we can double check on that.
The Lightning components, right, the base Lightning components should be available. However, I would prefer to say we'll look into it. I've not thought to try that. My apologies. As well as Lightning Data Service, I've not tried that either. So I would hate to make a statement and be giving you false information. So let us look into that one, and we'll post the correct answer.
Great. Here's the next question on force record preview. So for force : record preview, are we able to access or edit fields on parent records via _R?
Yeah, no, so that's, I think we looked at a question similar to that. So there are some limitations right now in, navigating relationships. So it's basically the record and it's single record. So again, these are things that we are looking at for future releases.
Great. Let's see here. Another force record preview question. Regarding force : record preview, do we have to use the record updated attribute, or can we use an aura handler name change value, v my target record as well?
Can you? I don't see that quite. Can you repeat it, Chris? I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. I'll go slow. Regarding force : record preview.
Yep.
Record updated attribute, or can we use an aura component, aura : handler, attribute name equals change, attribute value equals bang.myTargetRecord as well?
I mean, yeah, these are, well, so that change handler, if I understand the question correctly, so there is a handler, aura change handler, that notifies you when the value of a component changes, but that's within your own component. So, if the user changes the component, or if the binding somehow makes that the value of an attribute changes, then it will trigger that event. Record updated is in case the record was changed outside your component, essentially by another component on the page, which the aura change handler wouldn't catch, because that's strictly internally. So yes, so you have to use the record updated event to handle changes that are triggered by components outside your own component.
Great, thanks, Christophe. And I think we're just going to go ahead and do one more question.
Make it a good one, Chris.
I'm going to try, Greg. I'm going to try. Let's see here. I'm going to try to get one closer to the end. Will Lightning Data Service support querying related record fields?
Querying
related record fields?
Okay, yeah. So so that's the same question that we already answered. Not right now, but something we are looking at.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Christoph. Thank you so much, Greg. Again, for everyone who's asked questions and we haven't had a chance to get to them, we're going to go ahead and post a document with all the Q&A alongside the webinar, so that way we can hopefully get some Greg and Christoph's time to answer the questions offline. That concludes today's webinar. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. As I mentioned, if we didn't get to your specific question, we'll be answering them in a document, and you can also ask questions on the developer forums. That's developer.salesforce.com/forums. Please feel free to, maybe reach out to, if they're amenable, maybe you can reach out to Christoph and Greg via their Twitter handles. Do you guys want to share your Twitter handles for us?
Sure, definitely. So mine is simple. It's my last name, which is very simple. So just kidding. At CCOENRAETS.
Thanks. And Greg, is Twitter a good medium for folks to reach out to you?
That's the one that my wife uses. So I would say that's pretty good, yeah. And my handle is GARAZI. Excuse me, I lost my voice. GARAZI, or Z for my international audiences.
All right. Hey, thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Please enjoy your day. We'll get this posted shortly later this week.